we're going to be looking at welcome and inclusion, and I'll just share my screen there. And we sort of often say those two things together, like fish and chips or bangers and mash or Morecambe and Wise. You can see how clearly I've enculturated in the 15 years I've been here. But they are actually very different things. Welcome is a first step, and then inclusion is what comes later. Welcome is about making sure that people who are new don't feel alienated, that we don't create this them and us situation. And inclusion is where we can make opportunities for people to fully participate and be a part of the community and a valued member of it. So there's sort of two different steps there, and I hope we'll be able to reflect a bit on both today. And I'm going to start off with a video, which is from the Diocese of Aberdeen and Orkney. A few years ago, they did something very brave. They gave the children in their churches video cameras, and they said, show us from a child's eye perspective what worship is like for you. And I'm going to stop sharing because I'm not sure I clicked share computer sound. I did, that's all right. And so this is what a worship service looked like for children who were fairly regular attendees because they were participating in this project. This is what it looked like for them. Let's have a look.
Please be with you.
And I'm going to stop there. And I'm just going to ask, what did you notice about that? And what changes could be made to that situation that are quick and easy? And what might be some of the harder changes? There is a place for a well thought through children's corner or equivalent. So I'm going to get to the correct slide and then share my screen again. And what I'm not talking about is a cold space at the very back of the church where the children can't see or hear anything, where there's maybe a poster on the wall that someone put up in 1975 and haven't taken down yet, and maybe a puzzle that's missing half its pieces, and maybe some broken Thomas the Tank Engine toys. It's what Sandra Miller calls the dead teddy's graveyard. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a space for imaginative spiritual play, somewhere where children and those who are caring for them can see and hear, and if appropriate, smell, if there's incense or flowers or whatever, to smell what's going on, to be engaged in a sensory way in worship. Because then it allows the toddlers especially to escape at any time, to escape that pew that they're sort of jammed in the footwell of with their raisins and their toys they brought from home, desperately being told to shush by their parents. So you can get out of that. It doesn't escalate to the point where that child is screaming and melting down and having to leave the church to get themselves together and calm down and feel safe and okay again. Because the second that they start to wiggle and to move and to need to just be a kid, there's somewhere that they can go still within the church that allows them to do that, so they don't end up missing out by being taken out of worship. Play is the work of childhood. It's how we make sense of the world. So having a space where they can play with the symbols and imagery of Christian story and your church's worship tradition helps them to integrate that into their concept of who they are and what they do, and to play with those stories and those images. And we'll look at some examples in a moment. Go to that space if you can. Find someone whose knees can take it and get down to child height, preferably when there are people in church, and see what they can see and hear and smell. You can also have these spaces outside of the main church space. So if you have a messy church, you can have a children's corner. So not everyone always wants to do the activities. That's fine. They can go and do self-directed stuff in the children's corner. There's always that child who finishes in 30 seconds and then you have to find something for them to do. That's fine. They can go to the children's corner and find something and be in charge of what they're doing. Or children who need to just get the wiggles out a bit more than the other ones. Can this be provided at home as well? For when we're worshiping at home? Can we encourage play as part of worship wherever we are? I know someone who has a space in their service where, as part of the response to that week's gospel reading, they say, go and get whatever's in your recycling bin and make something out of that that reminds you of this story. So they don't have to send anything special home. They know that every child will have something, because you can't always assume children have particular toys, but everyone's got a recycling bin generally. And so they're responding in a playful way. They're doing something physical. They're still able to engage in that way. So here are some examples of some of the themed boxes that have been in children's corners. They're very Anglican, I'm afraid. The top left one is a baptism box, which we had in our corner, and which we also sent home with baptism families that had older siblings, so they could play with it at home and then bring it back for the actual service. So we have our little baby doll in its dress, and we have a shell and a candle and a little wooden dove that I nicked from a Noah's Ark. We've got the baptism cube, which you can get from church publishing, and you open and twist it around and it shows different parts of the service. We've got a Pentecost box that someone else made and sent me a picture of, with a little wooden stacking flame toy and pinwheels. So we have breath and wind, and we have flame-colored things that you can wave around and play with and make clothes out of. And again, we've got doves. And then she's got a list glued to the bottom of each tray with the contents of that box, so it's easier for parents to tidy up. Then we've got one directed at older children during Holy Week, for just putting the story cards in order to help them engage with the Passion reading as it's happening. But they don't just have to contain themed bags or boxes. They can, and those are the easiest ways to take them into the pews if you don't have an immediately obvious spot in your church to put a whole corner, because you can do it individually where the families are, as well as having one big one. They can also contain puzzles, lots of puzzles with Bible stories out there, or if you just search for famous works of art that are Bible stories, there are also some there that older children can do that have more pieces in them. Books, word searches, you can make your own online, so they can be generic and the same week after week with things about worship in them, or you can custom make them for that week's theme or that week's lesson. If you are making your own word searches, do just double check, because you put in the words that they want to include, and then they fill in random letters around them. And sometimes you can accidentally create a word that children should not be seeing or finding, that can lead to laughter and shouting in worship when they do find it. So just double check for accidental typos if you do make word searches. Crossword puzzles, again, there are crossword puzzle generators online that you can use to make them. Dress up costumes, sort of for 4 or 5 and above when they get really into imaginative play. Mini versions of church stuff. So for ours, which was a sacramental tradition, we had a little 5-pound plastic table from IKEA, which I covered with a meter of colored fabric in that season's liturgical color. And then we had some wooden egg cups to be the wine glasses. And we had the little silver plates that you get the bill in restaurants on. We got a bunch of those, and those were the patterns. And then you can get wooden bread with Velcro, so you can break it. Then LED candles, and some fake silk flowers, and a little wooden cross. And suddenly we had a mini children-sized altar for maybe 20 quid. Toy churches or Bible story sets, Playmobil. These are for, again, over 3, or with supervision. Playmobil has a lot of Roman and Egyptian story sets that connect very well to a lot of Bible stories. They've also, you can see it in this picture, they have a toy church for their wedding set. Word of warning about the Playmobil toy church, it takes about 2 hours to assemble, and it takes a determined 8-year-old about 5 minutes to take it entirely to pieces. But it is a very good church. It's got lots of the little details in there. So, you know, might be worth your while. Coloring for meditation. You can get books of coloring sheets with quotes from the Psalms on them, photocopy them so you never run out, and just have those out to give children something to do with their hands to free their minds to listen. Or you can have a prayer wall for people to put up prayers, concerns. You can have a thank you, sorry, help section. You can have a tree. You can have all kinds of things. Prayer Spaces in schools has some great examples of prayer walls. So lots of things that you can do with that space to make it rich for imaginative spiritual play. Storytelling materials, I forgot to say as well. So godly play sets or other storytelling materials as well. And when it comes to the presence of children in church, when it comes to the dreaded shh, which we often get, I think it's helpful to break down what's going on there with the dreaded shh, what's behind it, what's causing it, and what can be done about it. A very wise children's worker pointed out to me the difference between sound and noise in worship. We all make sounds when we worship. We sing, we say the responses, we whisper things to each other. Our knees creak when we try to kneel or stand up again. We drop our prayer book. Mobiles accidentally go off. So we all make sounds when we worship. And some of these sounds we're making all together, and some are, you know, just the little incidentals that happen. We cough, we sneeze. Sounds happen, and we all do them. Noise is disruptive. Noise is what would happen if your mobile went off and then you took the call and you're standing there in the middle of the sermon chatting to your cousin about their upcoming wedding. Noise is a toddler having an actual screaming tantrum, where that child does need to be taken out just so that they're not being stimulated on all sides by things coming at them and they can settle themselves. And so that tantrum doesn't disturb everyone else. However, there is a tendency in many churches for all sounds made by children to be treated as if they're noise. So a baby will coo or make little fussing sounds, not screaming, or a child will say amen into the silence after a prayer because they've just heard everyone else say that and they just repeat what they hear because that's what children do. Or a child will point at a stained glass window and go, "Look, mommy, I see a sheep," or any number of things that are perfectly appropriate sounds for a child who is engaged in worship. The sounds of a child's feet as they go up to get a closer look at the altar because something's going on there and they want to see what's going on and find out what it's about. Those are just ordinary sounds. But very often they get treated as if they were noise, whereas the same sounds being made by an adult won't get that treatment. Mm-hmm. We're all very patient with Tom, who is 84 and deaf, and so he sings 2 beats behind everyone else. We're fine with that. That's not a problem. But Hugo, who's 2, and is singing a random song because he's just making up his own song while everyone else is singing because we're all singing together and he's just singing too, he somehow gets treated as if he's a disruption. Why is that? Why is there that double standard? Some of the reasons that I've found in my experience, and you may have more, pastoral reasons. So for example, somebody may have just been told that, this is an example from my own ministry, you have 2 adult children, they've both just told you they don't plan to have children, you're never going to be a grandmother. So you're upset. Or you may have lost a child, you may be a bereaved parent, you may have just found out your latest round of IVF didn't work. The presence of children, for whatever reason, triggers something painful in you. And people being people, we often don't respond to pain in the best way. Sometimes we lash out when we're in pain instead of being more open about it. And so that might be what's going on. And so a pastoral conversation of just, hey, you seem upset when children are present. Are you okay? Is there something you want to talk about? Can be what's needed to start that conversation going and help that person to become more welcoming and to become healed themselves. There's also a sense of, well, we had to sit down and shut up. Why shouldn't they? A sense that, well, we had to suffer through it, so they need to suffer too. One church I know had a long series of conversations about this sort of thing, where they ultimately did decide they wanted to be the church that broke that cycle. So we can talk about the legacy of expectations that are harmful, and our need to pass on pain and suffering, and maybe we can be the ones who change that, who do something different. And looking at how effective the whole sit down and shut up thing was. You're still here, but a lot of people in your generation aren't. So clearly that wasn't working for bringing people closer to God through worship. So what else could we do that might work better? For a lot of people, there's fear. This false impression that if we become a church that is welcoming to children, that means we're going to be turned into some kind of 3-ring circus where it's all loud noises and bright colors and everything is dumbed down and I have to get up and do stupid dances. And what I value about this church, which might be its thoughtful preaching or its excellent music or the contemplative atmosphere of the services, that's going to go. That's going to be taken away from me. What I find spiritually fulfilling about this church is going to be thrown on the trash heap because we need to be welcoming to children. And then I'm going to be told I'm embarrassing and outdated for caring about that. And so I get really, really defensive. I come into this with my fists up because I'm expecting a fight. And actually becoming child-friendly worship, child-accessible worship isn't a style of worship. You can have all-age Anglo-Catholic worship. You can have all-age charismatic evangelical worship. You can have an all-age Quaker meeting. You can have everything in between. What's the essence of who you are as a community is not going to be taken away. It's just going to be changed so that more people can have what you have. More people can come to know God in this church as you have come to know God in this church. That's what we're doing here. We're not going to take away what matters to you. There's sort of a sibling rivalry thing going on, where if we're starting to be welcoming to more younger people, I'm going to be loved less. And reassurance that that's not going to happen can be really helpful. Some slow changes as well. Then they go, oh, that's what you're talking about. Oh yeah, that's okay, we can do that. And an assumption of what church is, which we often don't even realize we have, where we all assume that it's an adult event where children are guests. And that affects our expectations dramatically. and it affects everyone's expectations. Because when you're going into an adult event, you as an adult are assuming it's for you. And so your attitude is that children are welcome as long as they don't disrupt it for me. And if they make their presence known at all, if I even realize that they are there, then I am being disrupted because this is my event. Whereas the same people might be much more accepting of children being children at a family event or some other occasion where they understand it's for everyone, where they put it in a separate category in their mind of what this event is. So it's a question of stating from the front, this is not an adult event, this is an intergenerational event. Therefore, those sets of expectations and ideas of what it's about and who it's for, those are the ones we're going with. Parents internalize this assumption as well. I mentioned this a bit before. And so they switch their method of interacting with their children from getting their children to engage to getting their child to behave. So the parents taking their children to church have this automatic assumption, this is an adult event, my children are guests. So when their child starts to wiggle or say stuff, they think, my child is misbehaving and bothering the real worshipers. I'm embarrassed, so I need to make them behave. The emphasis is on not disturbing others rather than on getting them to engage in the event. If you take these same parents to something that is in the child-friendly category in their head, in my breakout room, I was mentioning a children's theatre show that I went to with my nephew when he was 3. And we sat him on our laps so he could see. And we whispered to him about what was going on. And we pointed out what we could see and what we could hear. We whispered, what do you think is going to happen next? All of those things. Most of these parents will have those skills. They will know how to do that with their child. Maybe even from your midweek toddler group, they will know how to do that because that's what they do at singing time. They give their child an instrument or a scarf or whatever you have, and they sing along with them and they help them learn the words and all of that. They have those skills, but because church in their heads is an adult event category, they don't think to use those skills in church. They sit at the back, they push their child down so they can't see. They just try to get them to shut up instead of trying to get them to engage. So helping them switch that category in their head can be really useful. Children internalize that assumption as well. And so they think, this is not for me. This has nothing to offer me. My job is to just sit here, get through it somehow until I can get out and have my biscuit at the end. Rather than, actually, this is for me. I might want to pay attention. I might want to look and listen and see what's here that might be good for me. And so when we welcome children, what are we welcoming? We are welcoming the whole child. Sorry, I've done a bit of a topic switch there, but we're going to have some Q&A at the end, so I'm just going to go with it. So we've got this idea about children coming through our doors and whether they feel immediately at home, whether there's anything there for them, how we help parents engage with children. And then now we're looking sort of more at the inclusion side of things. We are welcoming the whole child. We are welcoming the child as a person who has a spirituality. It's not something we have to give them. It is something they have innately. And Rebecca Nye, who is a psychologist and researcher at the University of Cambridge and has done a huge amount of work into children's spirituality, has come up with a mnemonic into what is needed in nurturing a child's spirituality, what conditions are required for spirituality to thrive. And she's made it spell out the word spirit. So as we go through them, think about to what extent these elements were available to children in your contexts before lockdown. What about now, as we're mostly still worshiping online? And how might they be available to children in the future? The first thing our spiritualities need to thrive is space. And so thinking about the physical space in which our ministry with children happens, whether that is like the video at the start with bums and backs, whether it's a freezing cold place at the back of the church with some broken toys in it, whether it's a room in the church hall down the road that has nothing on the walls, nothing to make it feel like sacred space, and where they do a coloring sheet and repeat a moral lesson for the adult's approval, or whether it feels like sacred space, whether it's warm and comfortable, whether there are things to look at and things to touch and things to do, whether those things are in good condition, whether they're the best that you can afford, or whether they'll do. It's only the children. But also other kinds of space, emotional space. Is there space to be apart from the regular world? Is it sacred space? Is it set aside? Is it safe space? Are we able to be vulnerable? Are we kept safe on a most basic physical and emotional level? And this is where safeguarding is clearly not just a box ticking exercise, but crucial to mission. Because if we are not safe in church, that forms our experience of God and our experience of the sacred. And we learn that we are not safe in the places where we are supposed to be most safe and most vulnerable and most fully ourselves. And so we need for church to be a place that is safe and where we can be held in safety. We need process for our spirituality to thrive. None of us is finished. We are not finished when we walk out of that church service. We are not done. We continue thinking and reflecting and growing and changing and learning during the week and throughout the years. And we tend to get very anxious about making sure children get the point of our session or learn the moral of our lesson. And so we expect them to be done and to repeat it back to us by the end of the session. And that shuts down the process because we expect it to be finished. We don't ask adults to be finished by the end of the service. We allow them to go forth and continue to think and wonder. But we tend to get anxious about children, so we want to make sure they've got it. And in doing so, we can shut down that process. And it's also not about performing for us or being cute for us. It's about their process. It's about them. Spirituality requires imagination. Doesn't mean our beliefs are imaginary. We can be imaginative without saying we've made all of this up. But imaginative play is one way children approach God, and there needs to be space for that. Relationship between each of us and God, and that we take that seriously. If a 3-year-old tells us something about God, we take that seriously. That is real for that child. It very possibly might be really cute. It might be really funny, but it's also something that is real and that we take seriously, regardless of that person's age or experience. And also relationships between each other, because we're not in this alone. We are there as fellow pilgrims on the way, and we can have safe relationships with people from different generations so that we can see what faith looks like at different ages and have that modeled for us and see what it looks like to be a Christian of different ages. Intimacy. And Nye says this is really hard to define. And I think there's a lot of overlap with space there. The sense that it's okay to come closer because it's about feeling safe. So there is that overlap with the space one there. And the safety needs to be very well guarded because life itself is not a gentle ride. So intimacy, that idea that we can come closer, that there's something deep there. And trust. Being comfortable with different kinds of knowing and not knowing. Trusting in mystery, trusting in wonder, trust in God, that God is working in this child's life, and so we don't need to do everything for them. Trust in the child, that the child is working out meaning out of what we're giving them. And trust in the faith itself, that we don't need to dress it up in magic tricks for it to have meaning. What we have to offer is a story of love, amazing, incredible, overarching love, and loss and pain and hope and exile and redemption and cries for justice and the loss of home and the return and rebuilding of home and the promise of eternal life and of a Savior who has conquered death itself through his life-giving work of love and who showed us how to live with each other. We have a story that has gardens and mountains and deserts and rivers and cities and towns. We have all kinds of symbols and images and stories and rituals and practices and traditions and new things that the Spirit is showing us every day. And this faith has held us through, for every one of us, probably some pretty tough times. This faith has, for most of us, probably stretched and changed and grown and sometimes disappeared and maybe come back looking really different from how it did before. This faith has toughness to it. And we can trust that if we offer it honestly to children in all its depth and richness and complexity, that there will be something there for them to get their teeth into. And we don't need to turn it into some kind of cheerleading routine or some kind of magic trick in order for them to engage with it. So we can trust the faith. I asked a few teenagers what it meant to be truly welcomed, to be welcomed as a whole person, to be welcomed as a spiritual person, what it meant to feel at home in a place. These were all children who had grown up regularly attending church. I'd known them since they were sort of between 2 and 7. And at this point, they were between 10 and sort of 15, 16. So these are regular churchgoers. And I asked them what it meant to feel at home somewhere. And this is what they said. So Jess, I've changed all their names. She talked about the importance of having jobs to do. So when they're doing the prayers and intercessions and readings, it encourages the older generations, the people you wouldn't normally talk to watch you and see what you can do. And then when we do stuff like the Christmas pageant, when we do solos and acting and dancing or reading, it's nice for them to be able to see the younger generation enjoying being part of the community. So for her, feeling welcomed and feeling at home was about being seen to have something to contribute by the people who didn't know her very well, to be able to go, look, I have something important that I can offer. I have something that I can do. I'm a part of this community and I matter. Then she also talked later about how she enjoyed being around older people and that she really loved it and that she thought older people were very wise and enjoyed being in the presence of older people and in their company. And often I have churches ask me, how can we do children's work? We don't have any cool 20-somethings in skinny jeans. And they don't put it exactly like that. And apparently skinny jeans are passé now. But this is what I say in response, that you don't have to, because people like Jess don't really care if you're young and cool. They want you to be authentic. They want you to be real and open and honest about who you are and what this community is and about your, the life lessons that you've learned and the journeys that you've had. And I have a friend who's an ordinand, and she grew up in an atheist family and started going to church at 14 as a way of rebelling. And this was a tiny village church with no running water. And it was her and a bunch of women in their 80s. And that was it. And she said they loved me into faith. They showed her where to go in the prayer book. They stopped her at the door and said, you'll sit next to me next week, won't you, dear? Because there was no running water in the church, they gave her sherry because that was all they had. I can't encourage that, underage drinking, but you know, they showed an interest in her life. These were not young, cool people. These were people born in the 1900s, in their 80s, in the 1980s, just loving this 14-year-old girl and caring about her until she felt like she was a part of them. Matilda says she doesn't have to always be alert to what she's saying or doing if she feels at home somewhere. So you don't have to be on, you don't have to have your public face on, you can just relax and be yourself. And then again, Ren, age 10, mentioned the importance of having something to do, having a job, being part of it. You feel that you're happy to be here. So a lot of that is short term. What we can do when people walk in, what we can do to make parents feel more at ease, what can we do to be more genuinely welcoming of children. Some of it's long term. The spirit stuff is really church culture stuff. How is that stuff available to children and their families? But looking at longer term organizational change, how you get a church to move from point A to point B, how you get a church to go from being sort of slightly hostile to a place where children are genuinely welcome as spiritual beings, where the spirit elements are present, where they are welcomed, where they have jobs to do, where they are included and part of the community. How do you foster intergenerational relationships? It's harder to tut at a child you know. So where are the opportunities for people of different ages to get to know each other? If you look very carefully at this picture, it's not just intergenerational there, it's also interspecies. It is a pet blessing service, and I was the guest preacher there, and I've got my cat in my arms next to a woman holding her baby in her arms. And I'd never been to this church before. I arrived really early when the previous service was still going on, and I had a cat in a basket who didn't want to be in a basket and was making it known very loudly that he didn't want to be in a basket. And so it wasn't a 2-year-old human, but it was something I had with me I was responsible for, and it was making a lot of noise. I was the guest preacher. I was invited. I was a diocesan official coming to one of the churches in our diocese, and I still felt really self-conscious about that yowling cat in the basket. So again, going back to what we were talking about, going to a new place. And if I, as a diocesan officer, felt that way, think about what it's like for a parent. Anyway, back to the topic. Many of you mentioned this at the very, very beginning. What role do children and young people play in being ministers? Who holds the power of the rota? How do you get to have a job in the first place? Is it like this secret password where you have to have been here 40 years ago when it was decided that Beryl was going to do the rotas, and if you want to do a job, you have to talk to Beryl, and we have never said anything about that since. So if you don't know that, you never get in. You never get access. One church I talked to, and this is a story that's in the book, so I'll just gloss over it briefly. They had a tradition where every Lent, every rota went up on the wall. And so you spent Lent thinking about whether you wanted to keep doing the job that you were doing, whether you wanted to stop doing something altogether, whether you wanted to start if you hadn't before, or if you just wanted to switch. And then Holy Week, you signed up in the entrance of the church where the rotas were all on the wall, so anyone could sign up. And this church had started over the previous year doing an all-age service. And so when they put the rotas up as usual, they found that the children and the teenagers took pens and started writing their names down because they assumed that that was okay. They assumed that this was for them because they had been doing jobs in the all-age services. If that rota system had been closed off, that would never have happened. But it was so open, it was so out there, it was so transparent that they were able to access it and to get involved in doing jobs. So the hidden gatekeepers are often huge. They're not the ones whose names and photos are on the church website, but there's often a lot of hidden gatekeepers to things. What decisions can children, parents, and young people help make about what social action the church gets involved in, about how worship is done, about how the church spends its money, about community links that the church makes? If you have a PCC or a governing body or whatever at your church, can children form a children's commission that reports to it a few times a year with their concerns and ideas? If you have an annual meeting of any sort, are children included? How could they be included in that? And where are the doors that are already half open? What sort of quick wins can you make that move towards integrating children and young people? And who are your allies? And then very quickly, a bit about worship and inclusion, welcome and inclusion in worship specifically online. I nattered on for too long. I meant to send you into breakout rooms for this as well, but I got carried away. So I'm going to go through this and one more thing, and then we'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A. So some ways that children and families can be more engaged in online worship and more included. Can they lead part of the service, writing prayers, presenting a video or drama of the story? If you have a slideshow at any point after the service in Zoom, does anyone talk to them after the service in person? How can you organize your social time so that children are included in that? How can new people in general be welcomed on Zoom in the slightly awkward free-for-all that it sometimes becomes after a service? Can there be something at home for children to make or do? This is the son of a friend of mine, and they're making a Lego of the story as they go along through it. So they can draw along with the service if they've got paper and pens at home. Then you can take a picture, send it in, and you can make an online gallery on your church's Facebook page of everyone's drawings. So you're doing something together separately. Treasure hunt in the service at some point, things to do with that week's story or that week's theme or whatever you're doing. Can you find something that's growing? If we're looking at the story of this coming Sunday's Anglican lectionary about the grain of wheat falling and dying, can you find something that's growing and bring it and show it to us? Making something, breakout room challenges, or having something at home that you can smell or taste or touch so you can have a sensory part of worship even at home. And then in broader church life, the ladder of participation. It was an idea in sociology in the 1970s about citizen engagement and decision-making processes. I'm not going to expect that you're going to write the whole thing down and have a deep, rigorous analysis of where your church is. I think I've sent these slides to Stephen and he can send them around so that you can have this to refer to, because I'm going to throw 9 different things at you and you won't memorize them all, but you'll get some idea of the process and where you are and where your next step is. So at the start, the first few rungs, young people are manipulated, or then they're decoration. So we have them there to look at, but we don't really value them. They don't do anything. Or then they're tokenized. So that there is our token young person who we trot out to make us look good, but doesn't actually have a job to do. The goal here is to maintain the status quo. So they're present, but their presence doesn't change anything. Many churches, I think, are in this part. So you've got young people assigned tasks and informed of them. You're going to do this. We've decided you're going to do this. Or then they're consulted. Can you please help us interview the candidates for our new minister? Thank you for your input. Here's what we've decided. Rung 6, actions are adult initiated, with decisions shared between adults and young people. So we've decided we're going to get more involved in homelessness in our community. Now help us figure out the best way of doing that. So huge, huge improvement in this bit. Children and young people are informed of what's going on, so they're not just left out. Their views are sought, their views are valued. But all power here still resides with the adults. So here you've got young people and adults young people leading and initiating action. So your young people have decided that climate change really matters to them, and you support them to help your church get the Bronze Award in Eco Church. And that's their idea, and they're initiating it, and you're supporting that. And then young people and adults leading and sharing decision-making together. So there's a real sharing of actual power here, and there's a sense of partnership of equals. Now, we may sometimes still need to make decisions that aren't popular with children, that are in their best interests. We don't want them eating 38 Easter eggs in a row. That's not a good idea. But systems and structures can still be arranged so that children and young people have meaningful decision-making powers in areas of genuine importance. So thinking about where your church is on this ladder and what can you do to get to the next level. So I'm going to shut up now. There's the shameless self-promotion bit of my book, if you didn't see Stephen waving it around at the beginning, where I go into a lot of this in more detail with a lot of stories and case studies and a footnote about a chicken. So do grab a copy if any of this is of interest to you. And now it's over to you for about 15 minutes. If you've got any questions, or if anything surprised you, or especially if you disagreed with anything, please do speak up and let me know.